Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Public Health Ontario's Rounds presentation on alcohol risk and policy, minimum legal drinking age, and underrated alcohol control policy. This is part 5 of a 5-part series. My name is Erin Hoban. I am a senior scientist at Public Health Ontario, and I have the absolute pleasure of moderating today's session with Dr. Jürgen Rehm. I would like to start the session with a land acknowledgement. I acknowledge the land on which Public Health Ontario operates. It is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the Credit. Before we begin, I will mention a few housekeeping items. The chat pod has been disabled to limit any distractions during the presentation. Please use the Q&A pod if you have questions during the session, and we strongly encourage questions, so please do enter them into the Q&A pod. A discussion and question period will follow the presentation. If at any point during the session you experience any technical issues, please email capacitybuilding@oahpp.ca. I would like to state that the moderator of this session, myself, I do not have any conflicts of interest. And now to introduce our presenter. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jürgen Rehm. Dr. Rehm is a senior scientist in the Institute for Mental Health Policy Research and the Campbell Family Mental Health Research Institute at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. He is a professor and was the inaugural chair of addiction policy at the Dalalana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto, and he also holds other professorships and positions in Canada, Germany, and Spain. His work has been awarded with numerous awards and prizes, most notably the Jelinek Memorial Award in 2003, the European Addiction Research Award in 2017, and the inaugural Kettle Bruin Society Award for Advancement of International Research Collaboration in 2021. Dr. Rehm is truly a world-renowned alcohol policy researcher, and I am very excited to have him here this afternoon. So I will now pass it over to Dr. Rehm, please.
Thanks a lot, Erin. Thanks for the nice words. It is my pleasure to walk you through an area of alcohol control policy which is not always in the limelight, but which deserves to be more in the limelight. It is the so-called minimal legal drinking age. And these are my affiliations. What will we cover today? First, the definition. We will talk about minimum legal drinking age, minimum legal purchasing age, which is actually the thing more regulated in most countries, the current situation. Then reasons why countries or jurisdictions like Ontario choose to establish such an age, the short-term health effects, the long-term health effects, enforcement, and then a summary of the take-home keys. So what is the basic definition of those terms? And legally, in most jurisdictions, we do not have laws about the minimum age for drinking. In many jurisdictions, this is actually regulated by the parents. And it would be unconstitutional to set up a minimum legal drinking age. However, countries can and should, and most do, regulate the purchasing age, and they can regulate this age differently for on-premise and off-premise purchases. If you look into the different definitions, we will see that basically we talk about minimum legal drinking age, even if we mean purchasing age. This is an example from the CDC website in the US, and they say it very clear. Minimal legal drinking age laws specify the legal age when an individual can purchase alcoholic beverages. And this kind of terminology has been adopted. And so you have to forgive people when in discussions they actually use both terms more or less synonymously. What is the situation in Canada? Well, as we know, every province can set rules when serving minors. In Ontario, the Liquor License Act states that people under the age of 19 can consume alcohol only if it is supplied to them by their parent or legal guardian and is consumed in their presence. So that would be the law in Ontario. And the next would be the situation all over the world. The black ones are the prohibited ones. Then there are some countries where it is 25 and older. Then there are some countries which have different drinking ages for fermented and other. And you see, however, that if you go around the world, the most prevalent age is 18. And then we have a few countries where it is somewhat younger. In order to understand these laws, you need to know that alcohol initiation is quite different around the world. For example, in a country like Thailand, it is normal that people who start drinking alcohol do so in their 20s. Actually, the age of initiation in Thailand, the average age of initiation is around 22. And that is not that untypical for low and middle income countries. So a situation where people start drinking at 14, 15, or around that age, like in Canada, is actually not the norm, but the exception. It's also true that a lot of countries have actually increased their minimum age. You may not guess so if you look into Canadian newspapers or American newspapers, where a big discussion is going on whether we should lower the age limits and the purchasing age limits. But basically, you see here that on-premise and off-premise, the percent of the population which is having minimum legal purchasing ages of 19 or higher has been increasing. And there's a lot of debate in different countries whether to increase such a law, including in high-income countries. For example, next week, I will actually go to the Baltics and I will have meetings with parliamentarians. For example, in Latvia currently, they attempt to increase the minimum legal drinking age from 18 to 21, based on the experiences which a neighboring country, Lithuania, had made about 4 years ago. The same is, by the way, true for another EU country, where currently they're talking also of increasing to 21. And a number of countries, including Germany, is thinking about increasing the minimum legal purchasing age for beer from 16 to 18. So the trend is to increase the minimum legal purchasing age. Why do countries do that? I've told you a number of countries who are currently planning so, and I'm just telling you that between 2012 and 2019, when we did our last survey, the following countries established a minimum legal drinking age. That was Burundi, Ghana, Italy, Laos, Rwanda, and Syria. And the following countries increased, Antigua and Barbuda, and you can read the rest of them. But you see that these are not only low and middle income countries, but high income countries as well. All of the information you will find in the upcoming Global Status Report on Alcohol and Health, which is supposed to appear within this month. So why do countries do that? Why this trend to increase this age? Well, the main health reason, which is cited in a lot of the laws, is the development of the human brain. Alcohol affects the brain of adolescents, and the human brain is still maturing until about the mid-20s, but the maturing is is mostly done by the year 21, 22. But before that, alcohol can have a negative effect on memory and even on long-term capacity. But also, alcohol affects the short-term health outcomes. And the two main conditions studied is injury, especially traffic injury, single nighttime crashes, and sexually transmissible diseases. Alcohol's effect on long-term health-term outcomes is a more recent development, but has been cited, for example, in some of the laws which are currently put into European countries. And then, of course, we have social consequences, and their violence, vandalism are reasons cited when countries change or increase or establish such ages. We then have the short-term health effects of such laws. And the prime example here is the US. What happened in the US? The US had a situation which was very much like Canada, in the sense that in the 1970s and 1980s, a lot of differences were between different US states. And it was basically between 17 and 21. And each state had their own reasons for establishing such laws. And what happened that it got actually harmonized? Well, Ronald Reagan actually passed a law where he coupled federal subsidies. It's the same principle as in Canada. The federation can basically give out money to the states, and they can, in this case, actually couple their money to certain conditions. And so Reagan said it is unacceptable how many young people die on our highways due to alcohol attributable traffic injury. So he said anybody, any state who does not increase this law to 21 will, of course, be able to do so. It's their constitutional right. However, they get less subsidies from Washington. And oh wonder, within 1.5 years, each of the states actually changed their law because they wanted the subsidies. This was not only good for public health, it was also good for research, because each of those states have changed their law successively. So let's say in Illinois, you had a change on the 1st of May. In Indiana, you had a change of 1st of October. And so what you basically could do is you could compare highway traffic crashes, and especially nighttime highway traffic crashes of 19 and 20-year-olds before and after increasing the law. And so every state would be able to be compared to the trend in all other states, which did not change the law, having an ideal, almost experimental situation. That was quite successful as a design. It also helped the law to be implemented, because within the first few months, a lot of states came out and said, oh, we saved so many deaths in nighttime traffic crashes, and usually nighttime single traffic crashes by people that used to have the minimal legal drinking age, but now no longer. And that resulted in an immediate reduction. However, there's also a way to analyze all of this with a continuous variable, and that goes as thus. Here we see basically in the thick line the percent of 18 to 20-year-olds that could drink legally. And it started off with around 85%. And then after implementing the minimum legal drinking age, it went down to basically 0. And then you see the death rate of 18 to 20-year-olds, i.e. people who before changing the minimum legal drinking age to 21 in those countries where it was not yet in effect, could actually drink. And you see that this rate has been going down while the minimum legal drinking age went up. And then you see, for example, the death rate of the 18 to 20-year-olds in daytime crashes. And you see that there's not a lot of change. And the 25 to 29-year-old, and you see that there is some downward trend, but much, much less pronounced. So that already gives you a visual interpretation of what happened. And then you have basically the statistics, and the statistic showed that a lot of those short-term outcomes actually decreased with the introduction of the minimum legal drinking age. And basically what you have is that the mortality actually decreased, and I will show you the estimates. No, here are the estimates. And you see overall that the significant ones are that the motor vehicle accidents actually, and in public health, we usually don't speak about accident, but I just took that from a publication, was highly significant. For suicide, it was highly significant. For other external deaths, it was highly significant. And you also see here the average mortality rate in the US at the time. So overall, this law was deemed to be very successful, despite a lot of newspaper reports that it actually was not fully enforced. We all know that there is some drinking in the under 21-year-olds that has persisted, but still at this point, the law exists, and still at this point, we can see the effects persisting. So, what is the effects on sexually transmitted diseases? That is something which could be studied when the Netherlands actually changed their law, and they changed their law and they found a big impact on chlamydia. And chlamydia was reduced when the Netherlands changed their minimum legal drinking age from 16 to 18. obviously, all of this is not as controlled as the US studies, where we really have pretty wonderful designs, which I told you. Here, we just have a before and after, and it could be the change in chlamydia rates could be due to the change in policy or to other reasons. Very clearly, in ecological designs, it's very hard to conclude causality. However, in the US and the original proposal, this is somewhat ameliorated because you basically had more than 30 states changing their law. And whenever a state changed their law, all the surrounding states basically kept their trend, but the state which changed their law dropped. And that is a much, much more convincing design for establishing causality. And then we have legal outcomes, and the same authors then just tried to check what the impact of including that is, and they basically saw that crime actually decreased as well. And that with a number of additional analysis, they tried to establish that as being causal, again, with some of the caveats of ecological designs. So overall, we have quite a convincing short-term effect of minimum legal drinking age. The exact amount, of course, depends on the size of the population and the habits in a country like the US or Canada, but a lot of people, 18, 19-year-olds, are driving. We have much more pronounced effects than in some European countries, where most of the youth is actually not doing a lot of nighttime driving, but is using public transportation. And in a country like Lithuania, we found a significant effect of the increase of the minimum legal drinking age, but then this statistically significant effect was based on 1 death per month changes. So that is not the biggest change. And when we discussed that with Parliament, because Parliament asked for good reasons why to keep the law, they were way more interested in the results on sexually transmitted diseases in the Netherlands than on the one person saved in traffic fatalities on average in Lithuania by the law. But they acknowledged that it did something. And when the party who has actually announced to change the law saw the results after the discussion, after the public hearings, after Parliament, and after alcohol industry tried very hard to change the law, actually, even the party who introduced the bill said, no, we are now convinced that the law is good, and they kept the law. What are the long-term effects? Well, basically, we see that there is research evidence on longer-term consequences. However, this evidence is scarce and had been mostly non-conclusive, because the few available studies are plagued with insufficient controls. But the idea is, if you have established a higher level of drinking, you will actually have more or less parallel lines. Now, this was a hypothesis, and there was only 1 or 2 studies in the US, but in the last year, we actually had a publication, Lancet Public Health, and that is the most controlled study. And Luukkonen and colleagues basically conducted a register-based national cohort study. So everybody was part of that cohort if they were born in Finland between 1944 and 45. So basically, they were followed up for 36 years. And they tested the hypothesis that having a minimum legal drinking age of 21 or of 18 would make a difference even 36 years following up. Their outcome were all alcohol attributable deaths until that time. And basically, they found that it was significant. And those who started their life with a minimum legal purchasing age of 21 actually had lower mortality rates than those who started their life later with a minimum legal purchasing age of 18. And basically, you see that in the darker gray, you see that overall the mortality basically changed. There is the lighter gray is the year between the times, and the white would be the cohorts which were able to buy alcohol at age 21. And you basically see that the lighter had lower mortality rates, and the mortality rates increased during the 3 years when successively more people could drink, and they were stable thereafter. So after overall the age was 18, then there was no more change in increase in alcohol attributable mortality and morbidity. And that's quite convincing, because what else should be the reasons that exactly this trend was happening during the years when they changed the law, and it stopped, it was stable before and it was stable more or less afterwards. So enforcement is key. I'm now talking about enforcement. You will say, okay, we will never succeed in basically having all of the people under age 21 not drinking alcohol. And you're right. That is not been the case in any country. It was not the case in Finland. It was not the case in the US. And it is not the case in those countries who are currently having a minimum legal drinking age of 21. However, we can show that even though those laws are not fully enforced, they already have an effect. And of course, they would have a much better effect if they were enforced. So that is basically the main point, and we can actually enforce laws best in monopolies. And the biggest threat at this point in the game are internet sales, where the control of age is no longer that great, and a lot of jurisdictions have pretty problematic enforcement of the law with regard to sales over the internet. And how do we know all this? It's because we can do mystery shopping studies. And I will now give you a very quick introduction to one of those mystery shopping studies, which we had conducted in one of our projects in Lithuania. So basically, this is a case study in Lithuania on enforcement. On the 1st January of 2018, there was a change in minimal legal purchasing age, which changed from 18 to 21, and which required everybody to show their IDs when purchasing. So basically, that was checked because for the law, it needed to be for any person under 25 years of age, the seller must request that the person who is purchasing the alcohol beverages provides an identity document. And oh wonder, this is the methods. Basically, there was a pilot, then there was a random sampling. Of course, in a country like Lithuania, which is small, you can do a random sampling of supermarkets in different towns and cities. And then you can actually do the mystery shopping. And then we have found out that there was still quite a lot of selling going on. So we warned some supermarkets and changed again and shopped again. But that third phase, that study only took place in 2 of the jurisdictions. So what are the results? The results are pretty much like here. About 45% could buy alcohol without showing any ID. And that is, or anything being asked. Here you have the different variables like time of the day, work day, and you see that basically this split is not is pretty robust. It doesn't matter how many customers are behind you, which day of the week it is. Weekend, you have a little bit more successful attempts, but this is not significant. This is barely significant. And it doesn't matter if you're before or after, etc., etc., etc. So what was the most disappointing is that even after notification of the intervention, we did not reduce the successful attempts significantly. So it was 48, it was later 44, and this is not significant. So basically, we were not able to just get this law being installed by just writing to the supermarkets. We are currently doing a study where, together with some newspapers and with public opinion, because most people say this is not correct, we are trying to get higher response rates, and this 4th phase is currently ongoing. I can't give you the results. But in the culture of Lithuania, you cannot, it's not customary, for example, to give the names of the supermarkets in the press. That is not considered to be decent. That's not considered to be okay with the culture. In Thailand, where we did similar experiments, that was the main measure which actually led to a better enforcement of the minimum legal purchasing age. Once the supermarket or the selling point was in the news, they changed immediately, and we had about 100% respect of the law. So basically, the summary is the current approach when legal requirement has not been sufficient, and we need additional action to increase compliance, and the additional action will actually be done by a coalition of NGOs and together with some of the press, which is interested to hopefully will lead to a better compliance with the law. We also offered some store personal training. Excuse me. But before we start the discussion, I would like to actually give you the main points. The minimum legal drinking age or minimum legal purchasing age is used in the majority of the countries around the globe. The ages which countries have chosen are currently, as a trend, increasing, but still the majority of countries have 18 or 19 as their minimum legal purchasing age. The main reasons given for the introduction of this law, which we can find in the parliamentary proceedings or in the laws themselves, is the brain damage in adolescents. And by the way, the brain effects of alcohol are more severe than the brain effects of, for example, marijuana. So there are relatively severe effects on the brain. But in addition to that, the minimum legal drinking age has shown short-term health effects, mainly in traffic injury, in traffic fatalities, in other kind of injury, and in sexually transmitted diseases. The long-term health effects on all alcohol-attributable mortality and morbidity and on effects of social consequences have not been known and are not cited that often in the laws themselves, but you can be assured that given that more and more studies are trying to look into those long-term effects, these will have also some kind of importance in the future. Enforcement is key, but we should clearly say that not if you have one newspaper report or multiple newspaper reports that so many college kids have been drinking alcohol before age 21 in the US. These laws still had effects and continue to have effects even if enforcement has gaps. And if stronger enforcement will be done, it will increase the effectiveness of these laws. And we have some evidence for that based on mystery studies that there is some tendency that states who enforce better actually also have less alcohol-attributable single nighttime crashes. The enforcement can be measured by mystery shopping studies, and mystery shopping studies, of course, can also be extended to all kinds of internet sales. The final thing I would like to mention, and I have not done a full discussion on that because that would be a presentation of its own, but basically, we also should put in ethical considerations in the minimum legal purchasing age, in what we allow or do not allow young adults, because adults is what we consider people 18 and plus, via law, and how much should be regulated, and if it's okay, for example, to have something like a mandatory draft to the army in some countries, but no legal drinking for the same person. I'll stop right there. I tried to focus this presentation on the public health aspects of the minimum legal drinking age and not the ethical aspects, but I just wanted to say that as a last word. And it's 12:40, and that's when I was supposed to stop, and I stopped. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rehm, for that very interesting presentation. We will now move on to the Q&A segment of this event to address some of the questions from our audience, and our Q&A pod is already blowing up because of how thought-provoking your presentation was, so thank you so much again. To the audience, please continue to enter your questions into the Q&A pod if you have not already had an opportunity to do so. So I'm going to go to the first question in the Q&A pod. Dr. Rehm, based on your research, is there a number for optimal MLDA to have significant reduction in alcohol-related economic burden?
Alcohol-related economic burden basically is something which we have studied, and the problem is that it will depend on the jurisdiction, because if you look into an economic burden per se, what you need to do to convince governments, you also need to look into the costs of this law and the enforcement. And in countries where there is very high costs of enforcement, where you would have to go to colleges, etc., on a regular basis, the effectiveness in reducing, or the cost effectiveness of such a law, is not clear. If you only look into the burden, meaning the cost part of alcohol, of course, a minimum legal drinking age will decrease the economic costs of alcohol. And we have done sample calculations for Lithuania, which was the last country, high-income country, who did that. And that is pretty clear. The question is, how much do you put into the enforcement of that law to be actually showing that there is a return on investment for this? And that is much less clear and will depend on the culture.
Thank you. The next question, according to data from MAD Canada, drunk driving deaths decreased more in Canada than in the US in the decades following the US's passing the MLDA 21. How can that be explained given Canada's lower drinking ages?
The main point is that the overall rates of single nighttime crashes are still higher in the US than in Canada. So we are comparing two different countries and different downward slopes in a certain historical period, i.e. in the period after the 1980s. We do not say that overall all alcohol or all injury or all traffic injury are actually being influenced by alcohol. Alcohol usually is responsible for around, in our jurisdictions, let's say 25 to 35% of all of the injury. And there are other factors who are also influencing that. And thus you cannot basically just compare countries like that. You have to control for all of those other variables. To my knowledge, there is no study. It would be interesting to look into that and to teaser out what are those factors. I would probably believe that a lot of the differences is in the cleavage between the poor and the rich in the US and Canada. But that is something which is not based on evidence, which is just a simple speculation as an answer to a question.
Thank you. How to enforce enforcement? Are there common effective penalties for sellers who sell to people under the minimum legal purchase age?
That depends on the country, and that is something we are currently trying to make countries aware of. There's a lot of countries who do not have the laws under which circumstances can being liquor licenses being revoked. What we recommend from WHO is the following. A, all selling of liquors should be time limited. Two, those who sell liquors and violate certain laws, for example, the minimum legal drinking age, for example, selling to intoxicated persons in some jurisdictions where this is forbidden, etc., should, if such cases are known and can be shown, then the liquor license could be revoked or penalties should be given, meaning that probably if there is one such incident, there will not be a revocal of the liquor license, but there will be a penalty of a few dollars, $1,000 or two, whatever. And if there's a continuous problem with violating laws, then this could be done. And if we have such a link to the license of selling liquors, then we see way better chances of actually enforcing the enforcement.
I have a personal follow-up question. So in Ontario, cigarettes are behind a power wall in corner stores, and you need to request access to purchase cigarettes. And as alcohol is being expanded to corner stores in Ontario, do you know if having alcohol or tobacco behind a power wall could potentially support better enforcement because the customer has to specifically request access to purchase the product? Like, does that instigate asking for ID? Do you know of any evidence that suggests that? Because I'm just curious, as alcohol is being expanded to corner stores and is being sort of sold or co-located with tobacco, perhaps a similar policy where alcohol is behind a power wall like tobacco might increase enforcement for minimum legal purchase age.
There are two answers to that. First of all, if you believe that the results from the research in tobacco can be transferred to alcohol, and I see some good reasons why this is the case, then we have lots of evidence. Secondly, for alcohol itself, there had been laws in some countries, for example, Estonia, that alcohol should be in parts of the store which cannot be immediately foreseen and usually alcohol is placed in European supermarkets in a way that it is on the most attractive way for the supermarket. So, and then there will still be some alcohol. If I go down, I'm currently in Barcelona. If I go down to the corner store, I can assure you that right next to the cashier are two big alcohol containers, one cooled and one not cool, so you can drink immediately cool wine or whatever you choose to, or a cool beer if you choose so. So if you take that away from and say it has to be in a special section of the store, which is not immediately visible from the entrance, that actually had effects on purchasing. And if it is hidden, Now, behind a non-transparent wall, that will have additional effects. And that effect is can pretty clearly be deduced from the effects of those countries who have actually changed the visibility of alcohol. Because if the visibility already has an effect, then stronger hindrance of visibility should have at least that effect, if not a bigger effect. But I would say it will also have the effect that whenever somebody asks for that, automatically it's much easier for somebody to remember, oh, I'm not allowed to sell this to everybody. I'm only allowed to sell this for those who are over 21 or 19 or whatever the legal purchasing age is. I would expect that to actually be the case. However, there's clear research that monopolies, just like the LCBO in Ontario, have the best record in actually protecting sales to minors. And that is something we can reduce the sales in supermarkets to minors. I do not believe it will be the low level which the LCBO and the success the LCBO currently has. And that has been actually demonstrated in lots of those mystery shoppers experiments.
Thank you.
That's not only Ontario, it's also in Sweden or Norway or Finland.
The next question is from Dr. Smith. He says, thank you for the interesting presentation. We saw a bit of backlash at the idea of increasing the minimum legal purchase age when it was raised in the recent Ontario Chief Medical Officer of Health report. Do you have any advice for increasing the acceptability of this alcohol policy option? That's the first question. And the second question is, what are the most common reasons given for not increasing the minimum legal drinking age? So the first question is, do you have advice for increasing the acceptability of this policy option? And then the second question is, what are the most common reasons for not doing it?
Information. I believe that scientists have a obligation to actually inform the public, inform Parliament about those effects. We have asked in several parliamentarian hearings at the beginning with very informal polls if anybody knows if minimum legal drinking age has long-term effects. I can assure you nobody gave a correct answer. Yeah, I mean, we checked them, when they said, yes, I do, we said, okay, what is the long-term effect? And it was something which was not in line with the literature. So I believe that making people aware of that, making people aware of the consequences and the success such laws could have is the first step. It will be a thorny ride. It is not that, you write an article and suddenly the world will change. That's not the case. We know that. And there will be way more than one report of the medical officers. There will be a number of reports going to that direction, and it has to be supported. The second question was about
the common reasons against implementing this type of policy.
Well, I mean, in hearings, in those parliamentarian hearings I've been attending on this policy in different countries of the last 3 years, there were 3 arguments which were currently made. The first was plain false. It was basically saying that the effect has no consequences and there's no proof that this is having success. And that's pretty easy, and it can be actually just showing the results of the systematic review for the US if you are in this part of the world, or for a European country, if you're in another part of the world, or for a lower middle income country, Thailand, if you will suffice there. This is just people trying to, not knowing that there will be people in the room who can actually contradict them. The second is that is also false, but there has been this notion, look, everything's liberalizing. We are no longer in the 18th century. We are no longer, we are in a modern society. And in a modern society, the laws have become looser and looser and blah, blah, blah. And again, this is false, but you have to say, look, there is no real argument here because, first of all, the laws should be for a purpose, and if they fulfill the purpose, we should have them, and if not, not. It's not about trend. You don't do fashionable laws. You do laws to protect or to have a certain effect, and that's it. But secondly, what you're saying is not even true, because in the last 10 years, there were 21 countries around the world, and we have only 190. So 21 is a good 10% have actually increased this law, and so you're wrong. The third is something which is way harder to argue with because it does not deny the effectiveness of minimum legal purchasing ages, but it says, look, how do I explain my son who has to go to the army in Israel that he or she cannot be drinking alcohol based on his own choice? And that's an argument which is likely to be much more controversially discussed, but it, in my view, happens every time we discuss.
Thanks, Jürgen. And I'll just add that before the presentation started, Jürgen and I were talking about the value of socializing this idea and talking about it more and more with different circles, whether that's, politicians or the public, so that they become more familiar with this idea and the potential benefits of this policy approach. One sort of follow-up question I had, Quebec has recently increased the minimum legal purchase age for cannabis from 18 to 21. There have also been discussions in Canada about increasing the legal purchase age for tobacco. I was just wondering, in your experience, is there any value from like a feasibility point of view in suggesting raising the legal purchase age in unison for all regulated substances, just to sort of build, like to align all of the different regulated substances? Do you know of any examples of that? Or in terms of, again, feasibility, would that be something you would suggest aiming for?
I would suggest aiming for it, and again, mainly about the ethical argument, because if you do something like increasing the minimum legal purchasing age for cannabis for 21, and you look into the consequences of cannabis in terms of morbidity and mortality compared to the consequences of alcohol in morbidity and mortality, overall, and for that age group, it would be way better arguments. I mean, I hate to put one substance against another, but it would be way more arguments for raising it for alcohol, but also in order for the ethics and for the brain, which affects all of those substances. I would argue that 21, if it's considered for 2 of the 3, should be considered for 3 of the 3. But I have no good studies for that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rehm. As we wrap up today's PHO rounds, I would like to thank Dr. Rehm for presenting. I would also like to thank everyone who joined us for today's webinar. You can expect to receive a brief and anonymous PHO round survey for today's session. Please try to complete this to help us improve our programming. Lastly, to access past PHO presentations and to view confirmed and upcoming sessions, please visit the PHO website, head to Education and Events, and click on Presentations. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.